Greetings, everyone. So today we are going to be discussing patriarchy. So let's get into it. And so here are some questions for reflection throughout the week. Maybe for right now, right? If you wanted to, you could pause and think about it. But growing up, what are some of the messages you were told about your gender? If this is something that you want to respond to, you can put it in the thread on Pronto and see what comes up for other folks. Two other questions that are more so connected to the reading. What is racialized fetishism? And also how do you see it occurring in the media? And then also how can parents take initiative to ensure that their children aren't subjected to or don't give in to patriarchal thinking, even though institutions around them are consistently reinforcing these ideas. First off, let's start at the beginning. It's a very good place to start. What are some of the differences between sex versus gender, right? So sex speaks to biology, the biological and physiological differences between people who are male and female, right? The two categories of sex are male and female. Sex can remain the same regardless of time, regardless of culture. Gender, however, speaks to culture, right? So you have sex, according to biology, gender connects to culture, right? So social and cultural differences between men and women. Gender often falls under two main categories, which is masculine and feminine, or men and women. However, gender can also have categories, or can also have categories around non-binary identities, and gender is far more fluid than is sex, right? So gender roles and expectations can change across time and also can change across cultures. And a lot of the distinctions around gender are created based upon social norms, and they are ever changing. So here are a few operational definitions that will kind of help guide us throughout the week. So according to bell hooks, patriarchy is a political social system that insists that males are inherently dominating, superior to everything and everyone, deemed weak, especially females, and are endowed with the right to dominate and rule over the weak, and to maintain that dominance through various forms of psychological terrorism and violence. Right? Feminism speaks to the advocacy of women's rights on the basis of the equality of the sexes. Misandry, right, speaks to the dislike of, contempt for, and ingrained prejudice against men. Patriarchal thinking describes the thought process that is common in men and women that upholds systems of patriarchy. Patriarchal masculinity, or toxic masculinity, is a concept that has come to the fore more recently in the past decade or so, that's used in academic as well as media discussions of masculinity to refer to certain cultural norms that are associated with harm to society and to men themselves. There's a comic strip on the right-hand side, and you see at the top it says boy toys, right? And then you see this little boy holding a box, and he said, and the person in the background, probably a parent or a caregiver, says, "It's Mega Bloks." And the boy's like, "What does it do?" And then they're like, "Be arranged in literally infinite ways and then hooked up to a computer and remote control." And then when it comes to girl toys, right, the parent's like, "It's a doll." And then the girl's like, "What does it do?" They're like, "Be a doll." And so then they're saying subsequently, why are there so few girl engineers, right? So this idea that based upon the ways that gender informs the types of toys we give people, what they should and should not be interested in, can inform later career decisions or inform the ways that people understand themselves to be good at something, for example. So the societal impacts of patriarchy. Some of these impacts look like gender inequality, right? So speaking to the unequal distribution of resources, opportunities, and rights between men and women. Political representation, right? We often see women underrepresented in positions of power as well as decision-making roles. Economic disparities such as wage gaps and limited access to career advancement for women, right? Like the idea or the concept of there being like a glass ceiling in many instances for women based upon the roles that they occupy in their career, or the roles that they can occupy in their careers. And then also social norms and expectations, right? So the reinforcement of traditional gender roles and stereotypes, which can limit one's individual potential. And so in thinking about this from an intersectional perspective, right, we have two different visualizations of statistics that give insight into gender pay gaps, but also in terms of the ways that careers or a woman's career can be impacted by gender as opposed to a man, right? So on the left-hand side, we see all these dollar bills, right? And saying for every dollar white, non-Hispanic men earned in 2018, women were paid. So for every dollar a white non-Hispanic man earned in 2018, Asian women were paid 85 cents. White women who were not Hispanic were paid 77 cents. Black women were paid 61 cents. Native American women were paid 58 cents. Latina women were paid 53 cents. And they're saying that overall, right, and the overall means like the overall average, right, irrespective of race, you see, or ethnicity, you see women being paid 80 cents to the man's full dollar. And so this is for the annual earnings of full-time year-round workers, right? Also, we have to think about care in relation to careers, right? So mothers more than fathers experience career interruptions, and this statistics speaks to how the percentage of fathers versus mothers saying that they have done certain things that have impacted their career in relation to caring for a child or a family member. So we have 28% of fathers saying that they have reduced their work hours to care for a child or family member as opposed to 42 hours, compared to 42% of women. When it comes to fathers, 24% have taken a significant amount of time off, compared to 39% of women, of mothers. Okay, let's try this again. So, in thinking about the differences or the differences in experiences between mothers and fathers in relation to career, right? We see that overall, fathers have been far less impacted by having to caregive for a child or a family member than mothers have, right? So for example, you have 28% of fathers having to reduce their work hours, 24% taking a significant amount of time off, 10% quitting their job, 10% turning down a promotion. Where on the other hand, when it comes to mothers, 42% have reduced their work hours, 39% have taken a significant amount of time off, 27% have quit jobs, and 13% have turned down promotions. Patriarchy doesn't just impact women, right? Patriarchy also impacts men in ways that can be negative, right? So on the one hand, you have patriarchy affirming one's social identity as being superior, and as a result that having like economic benefits or privileges and social privileges. However, there's also negative impacts that patriarchy has on men and their conception of what it means to be masculine. The creation of rigid gender norms, and a pressure to conform to quote-unquote masculine traits such as like stoicism, dominance, aggression, feeling like one has to repress their emotions, which could lead to lots of mental health issues and also physical health issues. and also relational difficulties, right? Like having a hard time connecting with your partner, your friends, your community members, because you don't have a space to speak about the things that are bothering you. And doing so often leads one to fear that they'll be seen as less than or less masculine, right? Violence and aggression, right? So there's a higher likelihood of exhibiting or experiencing violence due to societal expectations to be violent as like a normal part of what it means to be a man. So in terms of like the psychological impacts, there's definitely a major impact on self-esteem and agency, right? So we see women experiencing potentially lower self-esteem and a limited sense of personal agency, a limited sense of like what one's potential could be, right? Being informed by both ethnicity as well as race. For example, right, like we are currently in the midst of an election season and we have never had a female president. And that's not to say that there weren't capable women before, and that's also not to say that other women haven't ran. However, right, in a patriarchal society, young girls automatically know who they can and cannot be based upon who is available, right? Who do they see? What are the examples that they see in their society? Another psychological impact can be mental health, right? We see an increased rates of anxiety, depression, and stress due to societal pressure and also discrimination. We also see instances of internalized depression, internalized negative stereotypes leading to self-limitation or a lack of self-advocacy. Examples of the ways that patriarchy has been harmful. Baptist minister George Allen Rakers, who created a conversion therapy program in the 1970s through UCLA called the Feminine Boy Project. And in 1974, there was a four-year-old boy named Craig, who was enrolled in the program. And Rakers put Craig in a play observation room with his mother, who was equipped with a listening device. And when the boy played with quote-unquote girly toys, doctors instructed her to avert her eyes from the child, right? So basically she's not looking at Craig when that happened. And Craig received red chips for feminine behavior and blue chips for masculine behavior. The blue chips could be cashed out for candy or television time, and the red chips would earn him a swat or a spanking from his father. And researchers periodically would enter the family's home to ensure proper implementation of this reward and punishment system. And unfortunately, at the age of 18, Craig attempted suicide. And it's largely believed to be associated with the Feminine Boy Project, right? You have another instance, and mind you, there are countless instances, unfortunately, but Carl Joseph Walker Hoover, who lived in Springfield, Massachusetts, and was 11 years old in 2009, and he was being bullied by the students at his school for quote-unquote acting gay, but he didn't want to say who these students were because he didn't want to be considered to be a snitch, right? And after months of torment, he wrote a letter to his family. He bequeathed his Pokemon cards to his siblings, and he hung himself in his bedroom. And so these instances and these examples speak to the ways that a rigid orientation of masculinity is harmful to men and boys, right? Because when one falls even remotely outside of that, they are ostracized heavily and isolated in society. And so in Bell Hooks's work, Understanding Patriarchy, right, we have Bell Hooks framing patriarchy as a life-threatening social disease that is assaulting the male body and spirit in the United States. And so common assumptions, right? So one of the most common assumptions, I think, about patriarchy in the United States is that men are the only people who can uphold patriarchy, right? Bell Hooks is like, absolutely not, that's not true. We see patriarchy impacting everybody in society. So spiritually, patriarchy is recreated in society in terms of like, for example, if you are Christian, right? When we think about divinity, you have what? The Father, the Son, the Holy Ghost, right? That is a masculine, gender neutral trinity of like the divine. Also, the book of Genesis, right? The idea that a woman can come from a man's rib, even though biologically speaking, that is impossible. But the idea that the man comes first and remains first, but also that the woman is like a trickster figure who can't be trusted, is something that shows up time and time again in society, right? Patriarchy impacts one's psyche, right? It impacts how we think about ourselves, it impacts how we think about other people, and it also creates a culture of violence, right? You'll hear many times, especially when, some of us were coming up, many of us were coming up, right? This narrative of like, oh, boys will be boys, to like excuse harmful or violent behavior geared towards women or girls. And so both men and women uphold patriarchy and patriarchal thinking. And so patriarchal thinking is basically the thought process that reinforces patriarchy, right? So, for example, a woman could say to a girl, oh, you don't want to eat that because you want to make sure that you stay thin so that way boys will still like you. That is, and you're like, that sounds crazy. And I'm like, that's my grandma. But that is an example of patriarchal thinking, right? This idea that a girl's body, right, is supposed to be a certain way for a hypothetical imaginary boy, irrespective of, So the idea that this child is made to have to think about herself in relation to her potential value to a man. So patriarchy as a system, she says, has denied males access to their full emotional well-being. And so I'm going to pause this here. I hope you have a wonderful day. Take care of yourselves.